Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're leaving the world of modern concerns entirely. We're heading deep into the intellectual landscape of the late 4th century.
Specifically, the winter of 387 CE. It's a really fascinating moment in time.
And we're sitting down with Augustine, but not the towering theologian of the city of God that everyone thinks of. This is the early philosopher captured in his very intimate dialogues, the Soliloquia.
And we're focusing on a single, and I mean profoundly strange philosophical claim he makes there.
Okay, what is it?
It's the identification of the liberal arts, what he calls the disciplinae, with truth itself, with veritas.
Right, and on its face, that just sounds, it sounds completely arbitrary. How can grammar be truth?
It's an intellectual puzzle box. It really is.
So just to make sure we're all on the same page, when we say liberal arts in this context, we're talking about those 7 specific subjects, right? The core of classical education.
Exactly. They're usually split into 2 groups. First, you have the language arts.
The trivium. The 3 ways.
Right. So you have grammar, which is all about the proper structure and, the use of language. Then rhetoric, which is the art of persuasive speech.
And dialectic, the art of logical reasoning, of rigorous argument.
Which is going to be incredibly important for our discussion today.
And then the other part is the quadrivium, the 4 ways, which are more mathematical.
That's right. Arithmetic, the study of number in itself. Geometry, which is the study of magnitude at rest.
Music, or I guess harmony theory, which is number in relation to something else.
And finally, astronomy, the study of magnitude in motion.
So Augustine takes this entire curriculum, all of it, from grammar rules to multiplication tables to geometric proofs, and he just declares, this is truth.
And he's not speaking metaphorically. This is a core premise in his foundational thinking at this stage. It's a philosophical identity claim.
And the stakes here couldn't be higher. This seemingly bizarre idea is the foundation for his famous proof of the immortality of the soul.
A proof he later seems to have abandoned, but that's another story. For today, our mission for you, the listener, is to kind of act as his philosophical peer. We need to unlock the dense logic behind this claim.
To see why he felt he had to make this move to secure the soul's survival.
And to do that, we have to unpack 2 crucial claims that are sort of embedded within that big identity. First, why are the propositions within these disciplines considered inherently and necessarily true?
Okay.
And second, we have to dissect the unique, the absolutely central role of dialectic. He calls it the discipline of disciplines, the disciplinarum.
Claiming it's the truth through which all disciplines are true. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. And historically, commentators tend to just gloss over these foundational bits. They jump straight to the immortality proof and its theological implications.
But they miss the philosophical machinery underneath.
They miss the whole thing. If we miss this foundational step, we misunderstand his entire early intellectual project. This is about more than just an ancient curriculum.
It's about ontology, what exists, and epistemology, what we can know.
And how those 2 are, for Augustine, fundamentally linked inside the rational soul.
It sounds like we're not just analyzing ancient rhetoric, we're getting into the nature of necessity itself. Okay, let's unpack this by starting with those ultimate stakes. The soul's survival and the weird logic that ties it to geometry.
Okay.
So Augustine structures this argument for the soul's immortality in the Soliloquia with the precision of a geometric proof. It's very systematic.
It is, and it rests entirely on this idea that truth is eternal and immutable. But the real engine of the proof, the mechanism, is a very specific metaphysical relationship he posits between a subject and whatever inheres in that subject.
And this framework he's using, claim T1, it's basically Aristotelian, isn't it, from the categories?
Largely, yes. The core idea is, if something is in a subject inseparably, and that something always remains, it's eternal, then the subject itself must also always remain.
Okay, so it establishes a dependency. If the attribute is eternal, and you can't separate it from the thing, then the thing itself has to be eternal too.
Exactly. The soul's fate becomes tethered to the fate of the liberal arts.
So let's walk through the premises, P1 to P7, because this is where the philosophical assumptions are just baked right in.
Right. So P1 just establishes that general rule we talked about. An eternal, inseparable attribute guarantees an eternal subject. P2 then makes the big move.
This is where he connects it to the arts.
Yes. P2 asserts, every liberal art is in the rational soul as in a subject inseparably.
Inseparably. That word is doing a lot of work.
A huge amount of work.
Yeah.
P3 is just an inference from that. If the liberal arts always remain, then the soul must always remain. So far, it's just a logical deduction.
But then come the really heavy hitters, the premises that you really have to grant him for the whole thing to work. P4 is the identity claim we started with.
The liberal arts or truth.
And P5, which he actually established earlier in the dialogue, is that truth always remains. It's eternal, it's immutable.
From there, the conclusion seems to follow pretty cleanly. P6 is deduced. Therefore, the liberal arts always remain. And the grand finale, P7. Therefore, the soul always remains. It's immortal.
And Augustine thinks this is a completely solid, unbreakable chain of logic.
Provided you grant him P2 and P4, which are, as you said, massive premises to just grant someone.
Okay, let's really scrutinize P2 first. That in a subject inseparably clause, you said it's from Aristotle's categories. What exactly does that mean here applied to the soul?
Well, in Aristotelian terms, it means the existence of the inhering object, in this case the liberal arts or truth, is existentially dependent on its subject, the rational soul, the animus.
Meaning the liberal arts can't exist without a rational soul to be in?
That's the idea. The essence of the soul is being rational. The essence of the liberal arts is rational structure. So if these arts are truly inseparable from the soul, they're not just something it learns, they're essential to its very nature.
And if that essential nature is eternal, the soul has to be eternal too.
That's the argument.
But this creates so many problems for scholars, right? Especially because this is the young Augustine who is just soaked in Neoplatonism at this point.
Precisely. Scholars really struggle with what P2 implies. The biggest one is, does this mean the soul pre-existed its birth?
Right. If the liberal arts are eternal, and they are always in the soul inseparably, doesn't that imply the soul has also always existed?
It seems to. If the soul is just created at conception, you have to ask, when and how did these eternal attributes get lodged inseparably inside of it? His later thought would, run screaming from any hint of Platonic pre-existence. But here, it seems to be structurally required by the proof.
And there's an even deeper, more technical problem with this idea of inherence. Is it a cognitive inherence or an ontological one?
And that is the absolute core of the difficulty.
What's the difference?
Well, if the liberal arts are only cognitively in the soul, meaning the soul just has the capacity to think about them or learn them, that doesn't seem strong enough.
Right, because I can forget geometry. I could suffer a brain injury and lose my ability to do math.
Exactly. Does your soul suddenly stop being eternal because you forgot the Pythagorean theorem?
It seems like a pretty flimsy basis for immortality.
It is. If that's all he means, the entire proof just collapses. So he has to be asserting that they are ontologically in the soul.
Meaning they are part of the soul's very being, part of its substance.
Yes. They have to be constituents of its essence. Maybe as innate structures or as the fundamental capacity for rational thought itself, rather than just as, acquired knowledge. If they're just acquired, they can be lost. They're corruptible.
So P2 isn't about what an individual person knows. It's about what a rational soul is. That the soul, by its very nature, has to contain the essence of these rational structures, whether it's consciously aware of them or not.
That's the only way to save the proof. But even if you grant him that, there's another technical loophole scholars have pointed out.
Oh, of course there is.
The argument only requires the liberal arts to inhere in some rational soul at any given time, not necessarily in one single perduring rational soul that lasts forever.
Wait, what?
Think about it. As long as the class of rational souls exists, there will always be a soul for the eternal liberal arts to inhere in. But it doesn't guarantee that it's your soul specifically that lasts forever.
So individual souls could just be popping in and out of existence, and as long as there's always one around to host the concept of geometry, the premises hold, but the promise of my immortality is gone.
It completely takes the wind out of the sails for the person in the dialogue, doesn't it? It makes your personal immortality contingent, not guaranteed.
Which is probably why he moved on from this proof later in his life. All these problems with P2 really force us to turn our full attention to P4, which is the real identity crisis of the whole argument. How on earth can geometry and grammar be truth?
So to solve this, this conceptual crisis, how the liberal arts can be truth without being identical to, say, the Son of God, we have to see that Augustine is using the word true, verum, with incredible philosophical sophistication.
He's not using it in just one simple way.
Not at all. He's using it in two very distinct ways, and both are absolutely necessary for the arguments in the soliloquy to work.
Okay, let's start with the one we're probably all familiar with, which you'd need for any science, predicative truth.
Predicative truth is our standard everyday idea of truth. It's about correspondence. A statement or proposition corresponds to some fact about the world or some necessary reality.
Like saying the Earth revolves around the sun. That proposition is true.
Exactly. Or the sum of the angles in a triangle is 180 degrees. That statement is predicatively true because it corresponds to a necessary geometric reality. If a discipline's contents are factually accurate, it passes this test.
Makes sense for math and logic. But what's the second sense?
The second sense is attributive truth, and this is far more crucial for understanding how he groups the liberal arts together as a whole.
Attributive truth.
It denotes genuine class or set membership. It's about something being a true F or a genuine F.
Okay, so like when you say this is a true friend, you mean they possess the essential qualities of friendship, or this is a true diamond, meaning it's not a fake.
Precisely. It's a judgment about genuineness and essence. And Augustine uses this brilliant little thought experiment to draw the distinction for us, involving the fable of Daedalus and Icarus.
Right, so in the dialogue, the character of reason points out that the proposition Daedalus flew is, well, it's predicatively false.
It never happened. It doesn't correspond to any fact in objective reality.
But then she says the story is nonetheless an attributively true fable.
And why? Because it genuinely belongs to the class of fables. It has all the essential properties of a fable. It's a fictional story. It has a moral. It's meant to instruct. It is true to its kind.
That is a stunning distinction. A true fable is one that successfully fulfills the definition of what a fable is supposed to be.
And in fact, for it to be a true fable, its content almost has to be predicatively false.
So what does this mean for the liberal arts? For geometry to be truth, it has to pass both tests.
Yes, the implication is profound. A liberal art must be true in both senses. Its content, its theorems, its rules must be predicatively true. They have to be necessarily accurate.
Okay.
But its structure must also be attributively true. It has to be a genuine science. It must have the necessary structural integrity that separates it from just, a pile of opinions or a list of disorganized facts.
So there are two hurdles. A subject has to clear to be a liberal art and therefore to be called truth. First, the stuff it talks about has to be necessary, unchanging fact.
Right.
And second, its method has to be rigorous and systematic. It has to be a true example of a discipline.
Exactly. Think about something like alchemy. It might have definitions and methods, so it has some of the external structure. But its core propositions about turning lead into gold are predicatively false.
For Augustine, that would be a false liberal art. An imitation.
An imitation, exactly. And he seems to classify astrology the same way later in De Doctrina Christiana. It has definitions, it has processes, it looks like a system. But its content is based on fundamentally false, corruptible assumptions. It fails the predicative truth test.
So when he says in P4, the liberal arts are truth, it's really shorthand for this incredibly complex requirement.
It is. He's saying they are the only fields of study whose internal structure, their attributive truth, guarantees that their subject matter consists of necessary, immutable facts, their predicative truth.
This means the 7 liberal arts aren't just subjects that happen to contain some true statements. Their very essence is truth, in both the way they're built and what they talk about.
They form a privileged category of knowledge.
And if we accept that distinction, then the whole identity crisis shifts, doesn't it? We're no longer asking, how is geometry God? We're asking something different.
What are we asking?
We're asking, what is the structural unifying principle that makes sure all 7 of these subjects meet that rigorous definition of a genuine science and therefore qualify as truth?
And the answer to that is the discipline of disciplines. It's dialectic. So now we get to the engine of what we can call the metaphysical argument. And that engine is dialectic. Now, for us today, we tend to just equate dialectic with logic.
Right, formal logic.
But for Augustine, it's so much more encompassing. Reason, the character in the Soliloquia, forces us to make a critical distinction here.
What's the distinction?
It's dialectic qua discipline versus dialectic qua structure.
Okay, so the discipline is the subject we study, one of the 3 arts in the trivium.
Yes, the thing you learn. But dialectic qua structure is the organizational framework, the set of rules that dictates the necessary form for all genuine knowledge.
And this distinction is so important because it solves that self-referential problem we mentioned earlier.
The circularity problem, yes.
If dialectic is just one of the 7 arts, but it's also the thing that makes all 7 arts true, then it has to somehow make itself true, which feels like pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps.
But the answer is actually quite elegant. The structure makes the subject genuine. Dialectic qua structure provides the framework, the rules of logical coherence, of inference, of system that makes the discipline of dialectic itself an attributively true, genuine liberal art.
So the rules of reasoning validate the study of the rules of reasoning.
Exactly. It's perfectly coherent.
And this is where it gets really fascinating because the source material spells out 3 essential structuring properties that dialectic qua structure provides. These are the non-negotiables that separate a real discipline from just a pile of observations.
These 3 tools define the internal consistency and coherence that make a discipline attributively true. They are the markers of a genuine science.
First up, we have definitions.
Yeah.
Definitionals.
See, they're absolutely foundational. You cannot have a science without them. Definitions correspond to the primitive, the axiomatic truths of a subject. They clarify quid sit what each thing is.
The essential starting points.
The essential starting points. If you can't define your subject matter with absolute precision, fixing its necessary properties, you can't build anything on top of it.
In geometry, that's defining what a point is, what a line is, what a plane is. Without those, you can't even begin to state a theorem.
You can't do anything. The definitions ground the entire discipline in immutable concepts. They set the boundaries.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second property?
Divisions and collections. Divisiones e colecciones.
That sounds like organization.
It's the organizational genius that dialectic provides. It dictates the hierarchical arrangement of phenomena. You can think of it as a kind of classical version of taxonomy or a Porphyrian tree structure.
You're systematically classifying things based on their essential properties, going from the general down to the specific.
Yes, you're taking a whole domain of reality and logically sorting it. And the goal is to ensure sine confusione partii sua quique reduntur. Each part is assigned what belongs to it without confusion. This prevents logical category errors. It makes sure the scope of the discipline is crystal clear. Geometry has to be clearly divided from arithmetic because their subject matters, continuous quantity versus discrete quantity, are fundamentally different.
So this step guarantees coherence across the entire field. It stops it from just being a messy jumble of facts.
Precisely. It ensures that the discipline structure mirrors the inherent structure of the reality it's studying.
And the third and final property.
Syllogistic arguments. Ratiocinations.
So the rules of inference. How you get from one truth to another.
Exactly. These are the truth-preserving, deductive arguments that are essential for producing inferential knowledge. This is the mechanism of proof. The whole point of a liberal art isn't just to state axioms, but to derive necessary conclusions from them using rigorous logic.
And the power of a syllogism is that if your premises are true, your conclusion must be true. There's no ambiguity.
It guarantees the necessity of the conclusions. Rhetoric might use persuasion or probability, but a true liberal art, like arithmetic, relies on deductive proof to establish absolute certainty.
So these 3 things, definitions, divisions, and arguments, are the blueprint for metaphysical certainty provided by dialectic qua structure.
Yes. It guarantees the internal coherence and rigor that makes a liberal art an attributively true science. And we can actually formalize this as a little argument, showing why dialectic is the truth of being a discipline.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, P1 is just the definition of essence, and F is a true F in virtue of G, if G is what's essential to being an S. P2 then applies it. Every discipline is a true discipline because it instantiates dialectic qua structure.
Which leads to P3. Dialectic qua structure is essential to being a discipline.
And P4 ties it back to truth. G is essential to being an F if G is the truth of being an F. So the conclusion, P5, is that dialectic qua structure is the truth of being a discipline.
That distinction is the real key here. Dialectic isn't truth with a capital T, like God. It's the essential property, the structural standard that makes the whole class of liberal arts genuine. It's what makes them true sciences.
But there's still a missing piece, one you pointed out earlier. Structure alone isn't enough.
Right. I can use perfect logic on false premises. If I start with the idea that all birds can fly, and I know that penguins are birds, my logic will rigorously lead me to the false conclusion that penguins can fly.
Exactly. For the content of the discipline to yield necessary truths, the subject matter itself has to be necessary. It has to be immutable.
So what is that necessary subject matter for Augustine?
They are the intelligibles, the rations. He believes the subject matter of the liberal arts are distinct segments of intelligible reality, the eternal, unchangeable, Platonic-style forms.
So when you're doing arithmetic, you're not just manipulating symbols.
You're apprehending the reality of number itself. The concept of 10, or the relationship 3 plus 7 and 10, exists eternally and incorruptibly outside of our sensory world.
And because the objects of study, these intelligibles, are eternal, and the method of study dialectic is truth-preserving.
The resulting propositions must be necessary truths. This guarantees the predicative truth of the content.
So the metaphysical argument about structure has to work hand in glove with the nature of the subject matter. The beautiful structure is only valuable because it's applied to an incorruptible reality.
Precisely. Which sets up the perfect bridge to our next section, which is all about how we come to know this reality through the act of learning itself.
Okay, so we've established the structural requirements for truth, this attributive truth that comes from dialectic. Now let's pivot to the second major path Augustine uses to argue that the liberal arts are truth. And this one is the epistemic argument. It's derived from the act of learning itself.
This argument is really fascinating because it's rooted in, of all things, semantics. The character reason argues that the word disciplina, which means discipline or art, comes from the verb discere, which means to learn.
And Augustine's premise here is pretty radical. He's saying that true learning is, by its very definition, a factive mental state.
What does factive mean here?
It means if you have truly learned something, it absolutely must be true. You can't learn something false, you can memorize it, you can be told it, but you can't learn it in his deep sense of the word.
The formal progression is very clear. P1 states, if X is learned, then X is known. P2 states, if X is known, then X is true.
Leading to the conclusion, P5. Therefore, every discipline is predicatively true. The content of a discipline must be true because, by definition, a discipline is something that is learned.
This puts an immense amount of pressure on his definition of knowledge, on scientia. He has to restrict what even counts as knowable to only those things that are infallible and necessary.
And this is where it gets tricky for us as modern readers, right? Because if learning requires truth, and truth is restricted to necessity, what happens to almost everything else we think of as knowledge? What about history, or personal experience, or empirical science?
Well, Augustine's early epistemology is, you're right, incredibly restrictive. He generally limits scientia, true knowledge, to just two classes of proposition.
Okay, what are they?
First, necessary truths, the kinds of mathematical and logical axioms we've been talking about. And second, introspective phenomenal truths.
What does that mean?
Statements about your own immediate internal experience, things like, I exist, or this object appears red to me. You can't really be wrong about those in the moment you're having the experience.
So since the liberal arts are about external, objective reality, numbers, space, logic, their contents must consist entirely of those necessary, immutable truths. If a subject has contingent or false propositions in it, it just fails the test. It's not a true disciplina.
Right. This very demanding view of knowledge forces us to explore a difference between merely knowing a fact, which he calls sire, and achieving genuine explanatory understanding, intelligentsia.
So for Augustine, are those two different things, knowing versus understanding?
The most coherent reading is that understanding, intelligentsia, entails knowledge, but not the other way around.
Give me an example.
You can know a historical fact, like a date, based on testimony from a book, but that's not the same as understanding it. That knowledge is secondhand, it's contingent, it's potentially corruptible if the book is wrong.
So if I learn in a physics class that nothing with mass can travel at the speed of light, I might know that fact because my professor told me.
You know it, yes. But for Augustine, you haven't truly learned the discipline of physics until you understand the full explanatory structure. The definitions, the postulates, the mathematical proof that demonstrate why it is impossible.
So true learning isn't just collecting facts, even true facts. It's acquiring the entire rational structure that proves their necessity.
Exactly. Let's use our old example of astrology versus astronomy. A student of astrology might know a bunch of correlations like Mars in the 7th house means X.
They've memorized the rules of the system.
They've memorized the rules, but the relationships are contingent and, in his view, fundamentally false. The core premises aren't derived from necessary, unchangeable truths. So that student has memorized, but they have not learned a discipline.
Now contrast that with the student of astronomy, which is part of the quadrivium. They're studying necessary mathematical truths about planetary motion and geometry.
Right. The astronomy student doesn't just know where a planet will be based on some chart. They understand the necessary mathematics, the definitions, the divisions, the syllogistic proofs that guarantee the planet has to follow that trajectory. They have the full explanatory structure.
And that structure reflects the grounding relations between the intelligibles, the actual subject matter.
That's the key. So learning a liberal art is really about grasping the entire logical architecture that dialectic provides. It's that understanding of how all the propositions hang together that assures you of their necessity and incorruptibility.
So this whole process, moving from just knowing facts to having this integrated understanding, it guarantees that the soul has grasped necessary truth.
And since those necessary truths are themselves eternal, remember P5, truth always remains. And since the soul has truly learned, and therefore now possesses this eternal structure, the whole thing holds together. The epistemic argument confirms the necessity of the content.
And the metaphysical argument, which we discussed before, guaranteed the necessity of the structure. They complement each other perfectly.
They do. It makes Augustine's focus on education feel, well, it's less like job training and more like an existential quest. The act of learning geometry is literally the act of securing your soul's metaphysical status.
It connects self-knowledge directly to knowledge of reality.
Yes. The ability to grasp these immutable structures proves the immutable nature of the mind that is doing the grasping.
Okay, we have meticulously built up this complex meaning behind P4, the liberal arts are truth. We know they have true structure from dialectic and necessary content from the intelligibles, but we have to circle back to the biggest problem of all.
The immortality proof itself.
Exactly. For that proof to work, P4 needs to provide ontological inherence.
Yes. Let's remind ourselves why. The proof completely fails if truth is only taken in the predicative sense, meaning true propositions, or the attributive sense, meaning a genuine structure.
Because true propositions are just things you think about. They only inhere cognitively. And having the capacity to reason that attributive truth doesn't give you a metaphysical anchor for eternal life.
Correct. For the proof to work, Augustine needs an actual, eternal, immutable object that ontologically inheres in the soul inseparably. That was the whole point of P2.
So how does he bridge that gap? How does he get from a set of concepts, geometry rules, logical laws, to actual eternal entities that are inside the soul?
This is the crucial leap, and is where we have to infer the deeper rationale he must have intended when he wrote P4. When he says the liberal arts are truth, he doesn't just mean the propositions or the structural rules are the eternal object.
He means something more.
He means their collective subject matter, the entire set of intelligibles. That set itself constitutes intelligible reality.
So the word truth in that premise is really a collective noun. It's referring to the entirety of all internal, unchanging, non-corruptible objects. The numbers, the geometric forms, the logical relationships, all of it.
Precisely. And this is where the Neoplatonic bedrock of his early thinking is just so clear. Elsewhere, Augustine seems to identify veritas, truth, with this entire set of intelligibles. The whole world of forms or rations is truth.
Okay, so if that set of intelligibles exists eternally, that's one thing. But how does he justify that they are also inseparably in the soul? That's the ontological connection he needs.
He argues that the presence of these eternal entities within the soul is what makes the soul rational in the first place.
So you can't be a rational soul without them.
Exactly. You cannot perform arithmetic unless the rations of number are somehow present in your mind, providing the necessary conditions for you to grasp immutable truths. Their existence is a prerequisite for the soul to even be what it is.
So the very presence of these intelligibles, the subject matter of the liberal arts, is the thing that guarantees the soul's immortality. The liberal arts themselves are just the pathway to articulating and consciously grasping these eternal things that are already part of you.
That's it. If the intelligibles, the eternal, immutable concepts like geometric forms ontologically exist or inhere in the soul inseparably, then the soul itself must be eternal. This is the only way P4, the liberal arts are truth, can function as a premise for P7, the soul always remains.
This finally explains why these 7 disciplines hold such a privileged place for him. They're not just useful subjects to learn, they are the necessary means of engaging with intelligible reality, which is the soul's true foundation.
And this leads us to the ultimate synthesis. This is where he connects the whole philosophical project back to the divine. If this entire set of intelligibles is truth, and truth is eternal, then where is that eternal truth located? What is its source?
In Augustine's framework, that's not a philosophical question anymore, it's a theological one.
It is. Augustine contends that the entire set of intelligibles, the very blueprint of all reality, is contained in the divine intellect, the divina intelligentsia.
The mind of God.
The mind of God.
Yeah.
And then he explicitly identifies this set of intelligibles with wisdom, sapientia, or with the second person of the Trinity, the Son of God.
Wow. So when the interlocutor in the dialogue says the liberal arts are truth, what he is effectively, if implicitly, saying is the subject matter of the liberal arts is the set of eternal forms contained within the mind of God.
That is the fully synthesized reading. By identifying the intelligibles with both truth and God, Augustine connects the study of the liberal arts directly to knowledge of God. Learning geometry becomes a form of spiritual ascent.
And crucially, it connects to knowledge of the self. Because if the soul must house these eternal intelligibles to be immortal, then studying these structures through the liberal arts is fundamentally an act of self-discovery.
It's knowledge of the soul's own nature and its necessary non-corruptible components. The whole philosophical architecture of the Soliloquia is built to prove this. The only way to escape corruption and death is through the pursuit of immutable truth.
And that truth manifests through the study and mastery of the liberal arts.
They are the essential stepping stones, the visible path you walk to grasp the greatest truths, the eternal structure of reality, and the divine mind that holds it all. It is just a stunning intellectual defense of rational rigor as a spiritual practice.
It transforms a traditional school curriculum into a foundational statement about the human condition and its relationship with God. It creates that beautiful intellectual loop you mentioned. To know the highest truth, you have to master the structure of knowledge, and by doing that, you secure the eternal nature of the very thing, the soul that's doing the mastering. This has been a truly comprehensive deep dive into one of Augustine's most complex and honestly most puzzling early claims. We've shown that identifying the liberal arts with truth is far from bizarre. It's a highly sophisticated ontological and epistemic position.
I think our key takeaways are these. The liberal arts are true for two essential interlocking reasons. First, the epistemic argument. Their content is knowable and necessary because it's tied to these eternal intelligibles.
And second, the metaphysical argument. Their structure is genuine. It's supplied by dialectic qua structure, that mechanism of necessary definitions, divisions, and syllogistic arguments.
And most critically, the pursuit of these arts for Augustine is fundamentally a quest for ontological certainty. By studying the structure of reality, the intelligibles, you are simultaneously gaining self-knowledge and knowledge of the divine.
All because those intelligibles are the eternal essence that must inhere in the soul to guarantee its survival.
The profound stakes he placed on this kind of study, on mathematical and logical study, it just shows his belief that true knowledge is inseparable from spiritual survival. It's an assertion that human rationality is a mirror of the divine order.
So we've explored the 7 classical disciplines: grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, and the rest. But if we take Augustine's criteria seriously, if the ultimate goal of learning these arts is to attain knowledge of the eternal structure of reality.
Because their subject matter, the intelligible forms, is contained within the divine mind and must ontologically inhere in the soul to guarantee its immortality.
Then the question we have to leave you with is a modern one.
What if a modern science, say advanced computing theory or theoretical physics, or even the rigorous logical structures we see in molecular biology?
Yeah.
What if these fields reflect necessary, immutable mathematical and logical patterns that define reality?
Should we, if we follow Augustine's stringent logic, consider these modern fields liberal arts, in his sense?
Are they essential not just for, technological progress, but for defining and validating the very nature of the rational human soul?
A question of eternity for you to ponder as you reflect on the structure of knowledge in your own life. The deep dive continues.